two domes there, which insulate it from the atmospheric effect. There's quite a large chunk of metal at the bottom, which also removes the effect of air temperature. And the black surface in there is absorbing the sunlight and giving a signal, effectively a change in temperature signal, but that signal is proportional to the amount of sunlight, and it produces an electrical signal which goes down the wire here and is channeled off there somewhere. When I was doing my studies, this thing would be recorded every 10 minutes. I have no idea what it's doing now, probably more frequently. I'm standing very carefully on the north side of it so I don't shade it, which will upset somebody at some point. And so the effect of my presence here should be fairly minimal. Okay? But these are all things that have to be considered, and that's also why the Met site has a fence around it to stop or to reduce the amount of interference. I think that's more or less all I have to say about the standard instruments on here. Are there any? Let's have a look at the crib sheet. Have I said anything, missed anything?
Why are you wearing tights?
What else do you think we all should be measuring at a site like this? Bearing in mind in particular that the interest here has been primarily for agricultural purposes. Anything else you think would be
Methane.
important? Sorry?
Methane.
Oh, gases of various sorts might be interesting, yes. In fact, Sarah will be talking to you about that in a few minutes. What else?
Hugo, how you tight street?
Very good.
Yeah, get
Well, that's not really meteorology. I mean, basically, yeah, you would you can get information on the soil on the site, but once you've measured it once, it doesn't change, or doesn't change very much. So there's what's something that actually is really quite important in terms of agriculture. That, yeah. Yes. We haven't got measurements for that here. In the past, they have been done. So you can measure not just the solar radiation coming in, you can measure the full energy balance, radiation balance, with the terrestrial radiation coming in and the terrestrial radiation coming out. I'm afraid that's not here at the moment. But there are instruments that do that, and they have been deployed on these sites in the past. Now, there's something else. No? Right. I have to give up on you. Evaporation is one of the other things. Some of you are nodding as if you always there. Evaporation traditionally was measured with a big water tank, and you simply measured the level in the tank every day. You had your measurement of rainfall, so you knew how much was coming in, and as it went down, you could work out the rate of evaporation. The problem with tanks is it turns out is what I talked about, the oasis effect, that you've got a wet surface in the middle of a relatively dry area, so you get exaggerated estimates of evaporation. And it turns out that actually it's better to estimate evaporation using the physics. The physical principles have been worked out, and basically if you have the temperature and the humidity and the solar radiation and the wind speed, you have all the parameters needed to calculate the evaporation for a surface of grass or anything else. And that actually turns out to be more accurate or more meaningful than the traditional tank measurements of evaporation. So you won't see a tank here. There was one on the old site, but I think it was taken out maybe 10 years ago when they stopped getting interested in that. I think at this point, are there any other questions? Okay, shall I pass over to...
Thank you. So what, can I pass that over to you then?
Yes. Does anyone else want to look at these bits and pieces?
this as a climatological station. Just one final thing on that point is that if any of you are thinking about doing dissertations that require climate data, getting hold of metadata, climate data for the UK is still surprisingly difficult. The Met Office are extremely protective of their data, and although there is access through something called the British Atmospheric Data Centre, it's very restricted. However, because this site is on university property, if you have a project where you could usefully use climate data from here, we can get access to that in an unrestricted way. So it's a bit of an aside, but there are lots of projects where it's useful to know things about wind speed and direction and precipitation amount and so on. And yet, until very recently, it was incredibly difficult to get hold of any of that data, even though there are thousands of stations collecting that information across the UK. Anyway, that's enough of that. So the other aspect of work at this site is air pollution monitoring. Okay, any thoughts about why this might be a suitable location to do air pollution monitoring? Sorry? It's certainly not in the middle of a housing estate. There is a big power plant, Exhibit A, Ratcliffe-on-Sour Power Station, one of the most important coal-fired power stations in the country, and according to Greenpeace at least, one of the largest sources of CO2 in the country. So that was commissioned in the late 1960s, that power station, and for many, many years emitted many thousands of tonnes of sulphur dioxide and other gases out of its chimneys. So sulphur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide and particulates are going to be the three main pollutants associated with the power station. What else have we got?
Air traffic.
Yeah, air traffic going into East Midlands.
You have to do that.
Anything else? Trains, yeah.
Motorway.
Yeah, and then you go slightly further over, of course, you've got the M1. Okay, so although this is a rural location, it has a number of sources of pollution near it. So the earliest monitoring work that was done here was in relation to SO2, perhaps for obvious reasons because of our big friend down there. So work on SO2 and work on ozone was some of the earliest stuff that was done here. Now emissions of sulphur dioxide from that power station are significantly lower now than they used to be. Okay, at one time it was emitting about 90,000 tonnes of sulphur dioxide a year. It is now emitting less than 10,000 tonnes of sulphur dioxide a year. Any idea why or how they might have achieved that reduction? What options have you got to reduce sulphur dioxide emissions from a power station? Low sulphur coal, yeah. Scrubbers, okay, and they've done both of those things here. They've got FGD, flue gas desulfurization units fitted on here, and they've also switched to using imported coal from Australia and South Africa that has a lower sulphur content than the traditional coal. Obviously when it first started, this was a coal mining area, okay? So they didn't have to go very far for their coal. Now they ship it halfway around the world, but it's got a lower sulphur content. And of course, what about agricultural sources of air pollution? Breathe deeply. Cows burping, yes. So we've already had a mention of methane. What's the other pollutant that you might associate with agricultural sources? Manure? Yeah, but what? Anything in particular?
Manure produce.
Nitrogen, yeah. Nitrogen of various sources, and particularly ammonia. Okay, that's the... So you've got various sorts of nitrogen fluxing up and down from the soil, from the plants, nitrogen dioxide, and other things, depending on what the soil conditions are, might be nitric oxide, certainly ammonia. So at this site, as I say, there's been a long record of SO2 monitoring. And at one stage, this rather sad stump here that's got a bit of duct tape over a pipe was once a major flux monitoring site. They measured just about everything here in terms of pollutants at different heights. Now it's really a shadow of its former self, and it is now part of what is called, and I quote, the UK Eutrophying and Acidifying Atmospheric Pollutants Network, which is a bit of a mouthful. So essentially